With WrestleMania fast approaching, we should discuss a game with WrestleMania in the title, that being Legends of Wrestlemania, developed by Yukes, published by THQ, and released in March 2009 for the PS3 and Xbox 360. So yes, there were 2 WWE releases that year. But before I get into the game, we should talk about the past, or more specifically, the use of non-active wrestlers, or legends, in wrestling games. For the first few generations of licensed games, that being the 8-bit, arcade, and 16-bit years, we didn't see any older characters in wrestling video games for 2 reasons. One, the game rosters were so small, averaging around 6 to 12 characters, that you only had room for top superstars and maybe some higher mid-card wrestlers. Second, the WWF never really celebrated or even acknowledged their history, especially in the 80s and early 90s. Sure, there would be the occasional nod to it, but it was always more about what was happening at the moment. So why put former legends in when you don't acknowledge their existence? Things didn't really change when we moved to the N64 PlayStation era, even when rosters expanded to dozens and dozens of wrestlers. For the WCW THQ Aki games, they had Japanese wrestlers, but no legends. Although if you looked at the ages of some of their main eventers, they may have had that base covered. For the WWE versions of those games, they actually had a then-retired Shawn Michaels in WrestleMania 2000, and Andre the Giant in No Mercy the next year, which was actually pretty revolutionary, because we haven't seen anything like it before. Compare this to games from Japan like Fire Pro Wrestling and Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, where you had tons of legends in the game, some of whom the average gamer had no chance of seeing in their prime, if at all. Now, 2001 saw the release of Acclaim's Legends of Wrestling, which I'll get to one day, I swear. The gist of the game is it took a bunch of older wrestlers, not under any kind of deal with the WWE, and made a wrestling game. It was a smart way to make a licensed game at a greatly lessened cost. I don't know if the game was a smash, but there were 2 sequels, and in 2003's SmackDown Here Comes the Pain, also coming someday, the WWE featured a handful of legends to go along with the current roster. Hawk and Animal, Hillbilly Jim, George Steele, Roddy Piper, Iron Sheik, Sergeant Slaughter, and Jimmy Snuka. It was a brilliant move for 2 reasons. One, with WCW and ECW out of business, you had less wrestlers jumping between the companies, which led to staler rosters. This was a handy way to freshen things up. Second, people like me who became fans in the 80s remembered all these wrestlers, so this had a lot of appeal, especially since most of them didn't have many, if any, video game appearances in their heyday. The trend has continued to this day, where main features of the game like Attitude Era in WWE 2K14 is a major selling point. But the only time the WWE released a game completely focused on past wrestlers was Legends of WrestleMania. There was WWE All-Stars from 2011 that mixed past and current superstars, but Legends is the only game to deal exclusively in, well, Legends. I guess the most important question is, who's in the game? Well, lots of people. There's a decided focus on the 80s and early 90s WWF. So you have the expected names like Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, Andre the Giant, Roddy Piper, Mr. Perfect, and Ted DiBiase. But there are lots of wrestlers you may not expect, like Big John Studd, King Kong Bundy, Greg Valentine, and Coco Beware, whose other video game appearances were limited, if not non-existent. So who's not here? Well, again, lots of people. Probably the most notable absences are Randy Savage and Ricky Steamboat, both of whom ended up in WWE All-Stars. Savage had his DVD set come out in 2009, and Steamboat not only worked for the company, he actually wrestled in 2009, so I have no idea what the deal was there. I wish Tito Santana would have been in the game, as he was a staple of the 80s, and on the first 8 WrestleManias. And I could throw out names like Earthquake, Don Morocco, Bob Orton, and many others, but really it's a comprehensive roster, and most everyone you want is there. Oh hey, Arn Anderson and Michael Hayes, wonder how they found their way into the game. Maybe their prominent backstage roles had something to do with it? Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want to downplay either man's contributions to wrestling, but the entire game is based around the 80s and early to mid-90s WWF, and both men stick out like a sore thumb, and their inclusion just reeks of cronyism. And yes, I know Ric Flair's in the game too, but he's Ric Flair. And while I'm complaining, they also included Steve Austin, The Rock, and Triple H. First of all, they fall well outside the 80s and early 90s motif. And second, I've played these guys in a million games. How many times can you give someone the people's elbow? Do they really think the games won't sell if this holy trinity isn't present? Honestly, I don't think they made much of a difference. Hell, I'd rather play as Tugboat than any of these 3, honestly. Toot toot. And if you have SmackDown vs. Raw 2009, you can actually import all the modern characters. You actually use the Legends of Wrestling control scheme to play. It's a nice bonus and a great way to extend playability. And if you ever wanted Jesse and Festus to team up against the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, it's your lucky day. So that's who you can play as, but what can you do in the game? Well, there aren't a lot of options, and that oddly works in the game's favor. You can do singles, tags, a 6-man battle royal, which is weirdly fun, a ladder match, cage match, submission match, Iron Man match, and Hell in a Cell. And that's it. But honestly, who'd want to do an Elimination Chamber match with Hillbilly Jim? I do wish they could have found a way to do a traditional Survivor Series match, since that was a prevalent gimmick in the 80s, but alas, you can only do an elimination tag. The controls are curious. You can tell they made an effort to make parts of it basic, and it has a real arcade feel at times. You have a weak and strong grapple, a health meter, and a chain level. You try and string together combos of moves to build up your chain level, and once it's at 3, you activate a minigame, where you have to hit the right button when it flashes on the screen to ultimately hit your finisher. I don't care a lot for the minigame aspect. It's weird that your character will be hitting big moves and going to the top rope effectively by themselves, but I get why they did it. The target demographic for the game is an older fan base that may not be familiar with all these newfangled wrestling controls, so keeping it simple was likely for the best. But the controls also have some interesting features. Take taunting. In most games you taunt and maybe your strength meter grows, or maybe it's just to show off. Here the kind of taunt you do can have benefits. If you do taunt number 3, you can regain 25% of your health. Another kind pretty much enables you to Hulk up for 10 seconds. But the cost is 1 chain level, so there's some strategy here. Same thing for managers. If you have one, you can get advice, which replenishes your health 25%, also at the cost of 1 chain. So you have to balance out the benefits of extra health against not being able to hit your finisher. The main story modes are Relive, Rewrite, and Redefine. Relive is just what you imagine, as you recreate a bunch of WrestleMania moments like Hulk Hogan vs. Andre the Giant from Mania 3, and Bret Hart vs. Steve Austin from Mania 13. Rewrite is interesting, as it's basically undo the booking that upset you as a child. So you can have Jake Roberts beat the Honky Tonk Man at Mania 3, or have Bruce Beefcake beat the Honky Tonk Man at WrestleMania 4. And after Redefine, you play in classic matchup with different stipulations added. So Bret vs. Piper at Mania 8 is now a submission match, and Andre vs. Big John Studd from Mania 1 is a Hell in a Cell match, because I guess that would make the match interesting? Anyway, this mode features tons of footage from the various periods, which adds to the nostalgic fun. The graphics are fine. They really pumped everyone up to look like action figures. Just look at Andre here. He was not that jacked after 87, if ever. Normally I prefer a more realistic approach to my wrestling, but I think it plays into the nostalgia factor. If you were a kid in the 80s, wrestlers really were like superheroes, so why not have the graphics to reflect it? Commentary is done by Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, which just doesn't work because they never really called matches for a lot of these guys. Here's a thought. There's countless hours of Gorilla Monsoon commentary in the vaults. Why not just take actual comments about the wrestlers and throw in his endless catchphrases? Toss in a 360 or Pearl Harbor job or lower occipital protuberance or someone not doing their homework or being all bent out of shape or highly unlikely or glad I retired or...
Will you stop?
Okay. I like this game, but admittedly a good chunk is driven by nostalgia. I know you can't do one of these every year, but I think we're due for a sequel. Call it the WWE Network game, and you could have an AWA section with Nick Bockwinkel or the Von Erichsen World Class. There are tons of territory guys who have never been in a game. Have a Memphis roster or Portland or Florida. Get the rights to famous buildings. Up the stipulations and have an actual Survivor Series match or God Help Us War Games. You'd have a winner. In fact, maybe take a year off the annual WWE game. Maybe rethink your approach and replace it with this game. Alright, I'm pipe dreaming now. Anyway, enjoy WrestleMania. Thanks for watching. And remember, the winner is you.